Every building has a man like Walter Briggs. You've walked past him 100 times and never learned his name. He's the one pushing the mop at 6 in the morning when the elevator doors open and you're checking your phone. He's the one emptying the trash can beside your desk while you're on a call, moving so quietly you forget he's there before he's even left the room. He wears the same gray uniform every day. He eats alone. He never complains. He never asks for anything. You don't think about men like Walter Briggs. That's the first mistake. The Callaway Group occupied the top 6 floors of a glass tower on the east side of downtown. 43rd through 48th floors. The kind of building that caught the morning light in a way that made it look important from the street. The kind of company whose logo appeared on the side of buildings at charitable galas, and whose executives were photographed at industry conferences shaking hands with people who had their own Wikipedia pages. The Callaway Group was 18 years old. It had started small, a 2-room office, a borrowed conference table, a single idea about how commercial real estate development could work differently in mid-sized American cities. It had grown into a firm that managed over $2 billion in assets across 14 states. Its current CEO was a man named Preston Callaway III. He was 44 years old, third-generation money, and had taken the helm from his father 7 years ago, with the confidence of someone who had grown up believing that leadership was a thing inherited rather than earned. Preston did not build the Callaway Group. His grandfather had built something modest. His father had grown it steadily. But the architecture of the firm, its core methodology, its proprietary analysis framework, its foundational client relationships, the actual intellectual structure on which everything else had been stacked, that had been built by someone Preston had never bothered to ask about. Walter Briggs had been the janitor on floors 43 through 48 for 6 years. Before that, he had been other things. Walter was 64. He was a quiet man with large hands and a way of listening that made people feel heard, even when he said almost nothing back. He had grown up in a small town in Ohio, the son of a man who worked at a steel plant and a woman who taught 3rd grade. He had been the first in his family to go to college, studying civil engineering on a partial scholarship and a lot of early mornings working at a campus dining hall. After college came graduate school. And after graduate school came a decade of work that built, slowly and almost entirely without fanfare, a reputation as one of the sharper analytical minds in mid-market commercial real estate development. In 1999, Walter Briggs had been 37 years old, recently divorced, living in a 1-bedroom apartment with a whiteboard on the living room wall. The whiteboard was covered in calculations that his former wife had once called obsessive, and that he preferred to call thorough. He had a method. He had spent years developing it. A way of analyzing underperforming urban commercial properties that identified specific combinations of zoning, demographic, and infrastructure factors. That predicted revitalization potential years before the market reflected it. It wasn't magic. It was patience, pattern recognition, and a willingness to sit with data long after other people got bored. He had a method, and he had a partner. His partner's name was Douglas Callaway II. Doug was energetic and charming and knew everyone in the city. He had the relationships Walter didn't have, and the appetite for risk that Walter tempered with precision. They had met at an industry conference in 1997 and had recognized something useful in each other immediately. Doug had family money and the willingness to use it. Walter had the framework and the rigor to make sure it wasn't wasted. They had agreed, over dinner and a handshake, and then a formal written partnership agreement, to build something together. For 3 years, they built it together. Walter designed the analysis methodology. Walter wrote the client pitch framework. Walter spent 6 months building a proprietary market assessment tool that became the thing every client in those early years pointed to when asked why they trusted the Callaway Group with their money. He put his name on it, and he put it in writing. His name was on the original partnership documents. His name was in the founding filings. Walter Briggs, co-founder. Those 3 years were the best professional years of Walter's life, though he would not have said so at the time, because he was not given to declaring things. He and Doug worked well together in the way that complementary people sometimes work, not always agreeing, often arguing, but never losing sight of what they were trying to build or why. Doug had a gift for walking into a room and making every person in it feel that they were the most important person there. Walter had a gift for sitting down with numbers that other people found overwhelming and finding the story they were trying to tell. Doug sold the vision. Walter made sure the vision was real. Their first major project was a commercial block on the Near East Side of the city. A row of vacant storefronts in a neighborhood that every conventional analysis said was too far gone to be worth the investment. Walter's framework said otherwise. It identified a transit expansion that was 2 years away from completion, a demographic shift already underway in the surrounding residential blocks, and a zoning variance that had been approved, but not yet acted upon. He laid it out in a 12-page analysis that Doug read twice, and then carried into every meeting for the next 6 months. They found 2 investors willing to take the risk. 3 years after the project closed, the block was fully tenanted and worth 4 times what they had paid for it. The investors called Doug. Doug called Walter. They went to dinner. It was a good dinner. After that, the work came steadily. Each new client brought 2 more. The framework proved itself again and again. Not because it was magic, but because it was disciplined. And because Walter updated it constantly, folding in new data, refining the variables, making it sharper every time the market gave him new information to work with. By 2001, the Callaway Group had a waiting list. In 2002, Doug Callaway had a heart attack. He survived, but it frightened him badly. He wanted to sell his stake, take his money, simplify his life. Walter understood. They agreed on a buyout. Walter would receive a fair value for his share of the business as it stood, plus a royalty arrangement on continued use of the analytical framework he had built, which was now the operational core of every project the firm ran. The agreement was drafted. Walter signed it. Doug signed it. The firm's attorney at the time, a man named Gerald Park, witnessed it. Then Gerald Park died unexpectedly in 2003. The physical copy of the agreement went into a filing system that, when Doug sold the firm entirely to his son Preston in 2008, was never fully reviewed. Preston had inherited a business. He had inherited files. He had not inherited a careful understanding of how the business had actually been built, or who had built it. Walter had received his buyout payment. He had not received a single royalty payment in 20 years. He had written 1 letter to the firm in 2009, which had gone unanswered. He had spoken to an attorney, who told him that without the signed agreement, which Walter could no longer locate his copy of, pursuit would be expensive and uncertain. Walter had thought about it for a long time. He had decided, in the quiet way he decided most things, that he was not willing to spend the next decade of his life in a legal fight. He had other things he wanted to do. What he had not anticipated was ending up, 6 years later, pushing a mop on the 43rd floor of the building that bore the name of his former partner's family. It had happened gradually, the way most things happen. After the buyout, Walter had started 2 other ventures. One had done reasonably well and then plateaued. The other had failed in the 2008 financial crisis with a completeness that left him with very little. He had spent his 50s rebuilding slowly, consulting work, part-time positions, careful budgeting. His daughter, who lived in Portland now, called every Sunday. He never told her the full story. She knew he had been in real estate. She knew things had been difficult. She did not know the particular shape of the difficulty. The custodial job had come through a temp agency. Walter had taken it without embarrassment. He was 64. He needed steady income and health insurance. The building was clean. The management was professional. And the work was physical enough to keep him moving. He liked the early mornings before the office filled up. He liked the quiet. And if there was something faintly absurd about mopping the floors of a company he had helped to conceive, he kept that observation to himself and let it go. The way he let most things go. He ate his lunch alone. He ate it in the small break room on the 43rd floor, the one near the supply closet, not the nice one with the espresso machine where the associates gathered. He brought his food from home in a cloth bag, usually a sandwich, usually fruit, usually a small thermos of coffee that he'd made himself that morning. He sat at the corner table and ate at 12:15 every day, and was back at work by 12:50. He had a routine that the building itself seemed to have accommodated. He arrived at 5:45, before the security desk changed shifts, before the early associates came in with their flat whites and laptop bags and wireless earbuds that announced they were already in a meeting before they'd sat down. He started on 43 and worked upward. Floors 43 and 44 by 7, 45 by 8:30. The executive corridor on 47 by 9, which required care because 3 of the 4 partners kept their doors open and did not like to be interrupted, though none of them had ever asked him his name or said good morning unless he said it first. 48, the conference suite and the boardroom and the kitchen that the executives used. Last. He was usually done with his full circuit by 11:15. He spent the rest of the morning on maintenance tasks, responding to the facility's requests that came in through a system he accessed on a shared tablet by the supply closet. The associates knew him the way you know furniture. He was Walter. He cleaned the floors. Sometimes he fixed things when facilities management was slow to respond, because he was good with his hands, and because it was faster than waiting. He had once repaired a leaking pipe under the kitchen sink in the 46th floor break room in under 20 minutes, while 2 associates stood nearby commenting to each other that they were impressed he knew what he was doing. The comment had been delivered as a genuine compliment. Neither of them had noticed what it implied about what they'd assumed. There was a young analyst on the 45th floor, a 26-year-old named Daniel. He was the only person in the building who said good morning to Walter reliably, every day, without prompting. He always said it the same way, not the distracted nod that most people gave, but an actual stop, an actual look, an actual good morning, Walter. How are you doing? Walter had appreciated it more than Daniel knew. Once, when Daniel had stayed late and was clearly struggling with something on his screen, Walter had paused in the doorway on his evening round and said, without looking at the screen, "If it's a data problem, sometimes the issue is the baseline assumption, not the numbers themselves." Daniel had looked up. He had said, "What do you mean?" Walter had said, "Whatever you think is fixed in that model, check it. Usually something you assumed was constant isn't." Then he had moved on. Daniel had stared at the doorway for a moment. Then he had turned back to his screen and found it in 11 minutes. He never mentioned it to anyone. He wasn't sure what to make of it. He had filed it away as one of those small, strange moments that don't fully make sense until much later. Preston Calloway III noticed Walter the way he noticed all the service staff. Which is to say, he noticed that the floors were clean and the trash was empty, and therefore something was being done correctly by someone whose name he did not need to know. Preston was not a cruel man. He was simply a man for whom certain people had never fully become real. The firm's annual board retreat happened every October. This year it was being held in-house, in the 48th floor conference suite, a room with floor-to-ceiling windows, a long mahogany table, and a credenza along the wall stocked with bottles of water and small wrapped chocolates that nobody ever ate, but that someone kept ordering. The agenda was standard: financial review, Q4 projections, strategic planning for the coming year, a presentation on a potential acquisition of a mid-sized firm in the Southeast, 14 board members, Preston at the head of the table, his CFO to his right, the firm's longest-serving board member, a woman named Constance Oduya, 3 chairs down on the left. Constance had joined the board in 2010, and she had a reputation for asking the questions other people were hoping nobody would ask. What nobody had planned for was the elevator. Walter was on the 48th floor that morning because the cleaning cycle for the conference suite happened on retreat days, and he had been running ahead of schedule. He was finishing up the hallway outside the conference room when the elevator opened and 3 board members stepped out together, deep in conversation. They walked past Walter without looking at him. One of them rolled a suitcase over the edge of the mat Walter had just straightened and left it crooked again. None of them noticed. Walter straightened it again. He gathered his cart. He walked to the service elevator at the end of the corridor. He passed the open conference room door. Through the open door, he could see the credenza. He could see the long table. He could see, on the screen at the front of the room, the presentation that had been loaded for the day. It was the firm's origin story slide, the one they showed at the top of every strategic retreat, a visual timeline of the company's founding and growth. Walter had not seen this particular slide before. He slowed without meaning to. The slide read, "Founded in 1999 by Douglas Calloway II, built on a proprietary market analysis framework developed in-house." Walter looked at it for a moment. Then he continued to the service elevator. He pressed the button. He waited. He went down. He ate his lunch at 12:15. Sandwich, fruit, coffee, corner table. 2 of the younger associates came into the break room while he was eating. They were talking about the retreat. One of them said something about the origin story presentation, about how incredible it was that Doug Calloway had built the whole methodology himself without any outside help, that he was basically a genius for putting it together. The other one agreed, and then went further, saying that it was the kind of original thinking you just couldn't teach, that some people were built differently, that the Calloways had always had that, a special kind of mind for the business. Neither of them looked at Walter while they talked. He was at his corner table. He had his sandwich in his hand. He was, to them, no more present than the table or the chair or the window behind him. The first associate said she'd read a profile of Doug Calloway once in an old industry magazine that described him as a visionary who had seen the potential in mid-market urban revitalization before anyone else. She said it was inspiring. She said she wanted to build something like that someday, something that lasted, something with real intellectual foundation. The second associate said, "Well, that's why you're here, right? You're learning from the best." They poured their coffees and left. Walter finished his sandwich. He sat with his coffee for a few extra minutes. He was not a man given to bitterness. He had made his choices, and he had lived with them. But there was something about hearing it said out loud. Built the whole methodology himself. Basically a genius, visionary. Original thinking you just couldn't teach. That sat differently than the usual ambient erasure he had learned to carry quietly. It was one thing to be forgotten in a filing box. It was another thing to sit 3 feet away from someone who was describing, in admiring detail, work that your hands had built, your mind had designed, your late nights and your early mornings and your very specific and hard-won way of seeing the world had created. And to be invisible to them. Not dismissed. Not disrespected. Simply not there. He put his thermos back in his bag. He went back to work. What happened next did not happen because of Walter. He did not engineer it. He did not plan it. He did not make a call or write a letter or say a word to anyone. What happened was that Constance Oduya went looking for something she needed for the acquisition presentation. The Southeast acquisition target, a firm called Meridian Property Partners, had requested, as part of their due diligence, documentation of the Callaway Group's core analytical methodology. They wanted to understand the intellectual foundation of the firm they were potentially merging with. It was a reasonable request. Preston had assigned his chief of staff to pull together the relevant documentation. The chief of staff, a meticulous woman named Angela Torres, went into the firm's historical archives. The archives lived in a set of digitized files on the company server, and 2 boxes of physical documents in a storage room on the 43rd floor. Angela went through the digital files first. The methodology documentation she found there was thorough, but contained no clear attribution. It described the framework as the firm's proprietary system without explaining who had developed it. She went to the physical boxes for the original founding documents, looking for anything more specific. The physical boxes were dusty. She could tell from the condition of the folders inside that they had not been opened in years, possibly longer. The documents were organized by year, though not consistently. Someone had started a filing system and then stopped caring about it partway through 2004. She worked through them methodically. The 1999 folder, then 2000, then 2001. In the 2001 folder, she found the original partnership operating agreement. It was a 14-page document, stapled, with handwritten notes in the margins in 2 different types of handwriting, one loose and quick, one small and precise. She read the relevant sections carefully, the way she read everything. She turned to the intellectual property schedule attached at the back. It was a single page. It listed the market analysis framework by its original internal name, the Briggs Assessment Protocol, and identified its developer clearly. Walter D. Briggs. It described his contribution as the primary intellectual asset of the founding partnership, and specified that any continued commercial use following a partner buyout would require a royalty arrangement as detailed in Exhibit C. She found the original partnership filings. She found the 1999 incorporation documents listing 2 founders, Douglas Callaway II and Walter D. Briggs. She found the intellectual property assignment page within those filings, which listed the market analysis framework as having been developed by Walter D. Briggs and contributed to the partnership as part of the founding equity arrangement. She sat with the box open for a long moment. She was 29 years old. She had been at the Callaway Group for 2 years, and she had heard the firm's origin story presented in their own materials dozens of times. She had believed it, the way you believe the official version of something when no one has ever given you reason not to. She looked at the document in her hands. She looked at the name. She thought about the man on the 43rd floor with the gray uniform and the cloth bag and the corner table. Then she went and found Constance Oduya. Constance read the documents carefully. She had been on the board for 15 years. She was the kind of woman who had learned, over a long career, that the important information was usually in the things nobody had thought to look at. She asked Angela 3 questions. She got 3 clear answers. Then she excused herself from the afternoon session of the retreat, told Preston she needed an hour for a personal call, and spent that hour on the phone with an attorney she trusted. The attorney told her what she already suspected. If the royalty arrangement had been in the original founding documents, or in a subsequent agreement, and if that agreement had not been formally dissolved, and if the framework was still in active commercial use, which it very much was, in every single project the firm had run for 20 years, then the firm had a significant unresolved obligation. She went back into the retreat. She waited for the acquisition presentation to finish. Then she said she needed to raise something before they adjourned. Preston looked at her the way he always looked at her when she raised things, with the patience of a man who had learned that Constance usually had a point, even when he'd rather she didn't. She told the room what Angela had found. Calmly, factually. She put the founding documents on the screen. She read the relevant paragraph aloud. She said the name Walter D. Briggs clearly and without drama. The room was quiet. Preston said he wasn't familiar with that name. Constance said, "He cleans your floors. He's been working as a janitor in this building for the past 6 years. He's eating lunch downstairs right now." The quiet in the room changed quality. Preston's CFO pulled up the financials in his head. He did not say anything, but his expression shifted in a way that people on either side of him noticed. The attorney on the board asked Angela to send him the documents immediately. Two of the board members who had known Doug Calloway personally exchanged a look that communicated, without words, that they were not entirely surprised. Preston Calloway III sat at the head of that table and understood, in a way that moved through him slowly and then all at once, that the story he had told about his family's company was missing a person. A specific, living, breathing person. A person who was at that moment 4 floors below him, finishing a thermos of coffee he had made himself that morning in a small apartment across town. He asked Angela to bring Walter up. Angela went to the break room. Walter was cleaning up his corner table when she came in. She introduced herself. They had never spoken directly before, though he had cleaned her office every Monday for 6 years. She said that Mr. Calloway would like him to come upstairs. She said it was important. Walter looked at her. He had a fairly good idea of what had happened, though he didn't know the exact chain. He had known, somewhere underneath the daily routine of the past 6 years, that this moment was always theoretically possible. He had just stopped expecting it. He said, "Let me put my card away." She waited in the hallway. He put the card in the supply closet. He took off his work gloves and put them in his back pocket. He straightened his uniform. Then he followed her to the elevator. He stepped out on the 48th floor. He walked down the hallway he had cleaned that morning, past the window that caught the afternoon light, the way it always did, past the framed prints of the firm's landmark projects that he had dusted more times than he could count. He walked into the conference room. 14 board members looked at him. Preston Calloway was standing at the head of the table. He was holding a piece of paper that Walter recognized from 15 feet away. Preston said his name. Then he said he didn't know how to begin. Then he said he was sorry. And he said it the way someone says it when they mean it, and also when they know it isn't sufficient. Which at least is the honest way to say it. Walter sat down in the chair someone pulled out for him. He looked at the room. He had been in rooms like this one before, a long time ago, on the other side of the table. He folded his hands. The attorney on the board asked him some questions. He answered them. He confirmed the founding partnership. He confirmed the framework. He confirmed the royalty arrangement, which he described from memory in enough specific detail that the attorney stopped taking notes and started recording. He described the 2002 buyout, the signed agreement, Gerald Park's witness signature, the letter he had sent in 2009. He described all of it the way he had always processed difficulty, clearly, without embellishment, without performance. When he was done, the room was quiet again. Constance Oduya said, "Mr. Briggs, is there anything you need right now? Immediately?" Walter thought about it. Then he said, "I'd like a cup of coffee, if that's all right. The good kind. I've been walking past that espresso machine for 6 years." There was a pause. Then someone laughed. Then several people laughed. It broke something in the room that needed to be broken. Someone made him a coffee. The legal process that followed took several months. It was not a fight. Preston Calloway III was not a man who doubled down on a wrong once he understood it was a wrong. He instructed the firm's attorneys to work with Walter's attorney. Walter hired one, a good one. using a personal loan from his daughter who insisted when he tried to decline. They worked toward a fair resolution. Constance Oduya sat on the resolution committee. She made sure fair meant fair. What Walter received was not a number that restored 20 years. Nothing could do that. What he received was an acknowledgement in the firm's official founding record, updated on the company's website and in every piece of institutional history going forward. Walter D. Briggs, co-founder, the Callaway Group. He received a retroactive royalty settlement that the attorneys calculated based on the framework's documented role in the firm's revenue over 20 years. It was a significant number. He received an ongoing advisory arrangement if he chose to use it. He chose to use it occasionally. Not regularly. He had other things he wanted to do with his time now. He did not go back to work as a janitor after the resolution. He wasn't asked to, and he wouldn't have in any case. He gave proper notice to the building services manager, a man named Terry, who had been fair to him for 6 years. Terry shook his hand and said, without knowing everything, that whatever was happening, it looked like it was the right thing. Walter said it felt that way. He moved out of his apartment and rented a small house with a porch. His daughter came to visit. He told her the full story, all of it. The way he had never told it before. She cried a little. He didn't, but he came close. She asked him why he hadn't fought harder years ago. And he said the same thing he had said to himself many times. Because he'd made a choice, and it was his choice to make, and he had lived with it, and now it had resolved the way things sometimes do if you live long enough and stay honest. She said that was either very wise or very stubborn. He said probably both. The Callaway Group updated its origin story slide. The new version read, founded in 1999 by Douglas Callaway II and Walter D. Briggs, built on a proprietary market analysis framework developed by Walter D. Briggs. The slide was shown at the next annual retreat. Preston stood at the head of the same mahogany table, in front of the same floor-to-ceiling windows, and said that he wanted to acknowledge that the company's history had not been fully told until now, and that it would be told fully going forward. He did not pretend this was heroic on his part. Constance Oduya had made sure of that. She had told him, in a private conversation before the retreat, that the only version of this story in which he came out with any dignity was the one where he fixed it without making it about how good he was for fixing it. He had listened. Walter did not attend that retreat. He wasn't there for the slide. He heard about it from Constance, who called him to tell him. He said thank you. She said don't thank her, she was just doing her job. He said sometimes doing your job properly is the biggest thing a person can do. And she said she supposed that was true. He had started working again, on his own, consulting for 2 small development firms that were doing the kind of mid-market urban revitalization work he had always been most interested in. The kind of work the Callaway Group had been built on. The kind of work, as it happened, that his framework was still very well suited for. He charged a fair rate. He took on clients he believed in. He worked at his own pace, at a desk in his new house, with a whiteboard on the wall that was starting to fill up again. The janitor's cart was in a supply closet on the 43rd floor of a glass tower on the east side of downtown. Someone else was pushing it now. The floors were clean, the trash cans were empty. And on the wall of a conference room 48 floors above the street, in a building that caught the morning light in a way that made it look important, a slide now showed 2 names where there had only been one. It had always been 2. It just took a broken elevator, a thorough young woman, and one board member who knew how to read a document to make the rest of the world catch up to the truth that had been sitting in a filing box for 20 years, patient and waiting, the way truth usually does. This is a fictional story created for entertainment purposes. All characters, companies, locations, and events are entirely invented. Any resemblance to real persons or institutions is coincidental.